What's going on, guys? It's ETA Prime back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at a new tiny little handheld that really resembles the Switch Lite. This is known as the PowKiddy Q90, or you might also find it as the LD300. There will probably be other names floating around out there for this little console, but they'll all be the same. Base price on the Q90 is $50, but I have seen it on sale for $45 on Newogeo's website. Before we even get started here, it is overpriced if you're paying $45 to $50 for this unit. If you can pick one of these up for 30 bucks, I think it's an awesome little handheld device to keep with you on the go. And hopefully we do see the price on this come down to around $25 or $30 because it even struggles with SNES, and we'll get into that in just a second. But first up, like I mentioned, it's the Q90. PowKiddy Q90, some other companies are claiming it as their own, or the LD300. Inside of the box, you're going to get the console, a USB Type-C cable, and a user manual. Personally, I do love the design of this. I'm really partial to the Nintendo Switch, so seeing something like this really makes me want it to be good, but unfortunately it's just a little too underpowered for the price they're charging for it. So with this little unit, we get a 3-inch IPS display at 320 by 240, single analog stick, D-pad, A, B, X, Y, start, select, and plus and minus buttons on the front. On the very top here, we have an L and an R button, plus we have our USB Type-C for charging the unit up. Moving around to the bottom, micro SD card slot and a 3.5mm audio jack for your headphones, a volume wheel on the right hand side, and finally our power switch over on the left hand side. This unit does have a dual speaker setup and it actually sounds pretty good. For the battery, we have a 1500 mAh NEOGEO BP4L, so this can be replaced pretty easily. And since I'm here, I figured I'd go ahead and tear this thing down and just see what's powering it. I couldn't find the true specs online, but it's very easy to take apart. It's got 4 screws in the back. You'll have to remove the ribbon cable for the IPS display, and then we'll flip the board over, and it looks like it's powered by the all-winner F1C100S. This is a single-core ARM chip clocked up to 900 MHz, and in this unit it's running at 700, with 32 MB of DDR RAM integrated into the SoC itself. And unfortunately, we have seen this chip before in the original Pocket Go, so we're gonna have to see if this thing has screen tearing like the original Pocket Go did. There were firmware updates for the original Pocket Go that helped out with screen tearing, but it never really fully eliminated it. If you're familiar with these Chinese handheld retro consoles, you'll be very familiar with the operating system here, because it's using G-Menu NX. Now, under the ports here, we have the basics: Cave Story, Doom, Digger, Mr. Driller, some Pang, Quake 1, Quake 2, King of Fighters, Wolfenstein 3D, and a few more in here. And if we head over to settings, we obviously have settings, skin, about, and power. Under skin here, we can actually change the default kind of theme. There's a Zelda theme, XFCE, Super Famicom Mini, Pixel UI, Old Boy. There's a lot to choose from in here, but I kind of like the default theme that comes preloaded. I think it looks great with the color of the case here. And as for emulators, we have Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, NES, Super Famicom or Super Nintendo, Game Gear, Master System, Mega Drive. PlayStation 1 is listed, but it's definitely not going to run well on this hardware. You could get by with some games using frame skip, but personally I'd just rather skip it on a console like this because it just doesn't have the power to push it. And like I mentioned in the beginning, I was even having trouble with Super Nintendo games with no frame skip on. And I'm not talking about games that utilize the FX chip. I'm talking about pretty easy to run games like Mega Man X and even Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Edition. So here we are with Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I do have the FPS in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. I know it's a little harder to see here, but this game should be running at 60 FPS if it was running at full speed. Keep in mind I don't have frame skip on. I've seen it go as low as 31 FPS in gameplay with no frame skip. So I'd say we get an average of around 40 FPS with no frame skip on. It will dip even lower than that. Sometimes you'll see it go up to 59, but overall, for the most part, we're around 41 to 43 FPS. Now if I go into the settings and turn frame skip on, I'm just going to set it to 1. All the games that I've tested here run great. We're getting a constant 60 FPS, but keep in mind that frame skip's on and sometimes the music can get a little funky. It's really disappointing because there is hardware out there that would run these games at full speed. They could have thrown in this little thing. And I personally really do like the look and feel of this console. And just to give you another look at SNES, this is Mega Man X. We're around 41 FPS, but I've seen it drop as low as 30 with no frame skip. I'll go ahead and set frame skip to 1, and now we're back up to 60, but you might notice that the music is a little weird. And one thing that I immediately noticed, with or without frame skip, is the sound of the Buster. As soon as I charge it up and shoot it, it definitely doesn't sound right. Since this is using the same internals as the Pocket Go minus the screen, we do have a different screen here, I wanted to test out screen tearing. Now, while playing games, I don't notice it at all, except when I'm switching between the menu and going into game. I do notice a little bit of frame tearing going on, but while I'm playing the game, I haven't had any issues. So I downloaded a little 240p test for SNES. At the very top, we have the brand new Pocket Go or the Pocket Go 2. On the bottom here, we have the Q90. And hopefully this is coming across okay on the camera, but if you take a look at the Q90 screen, we still have screen tearing going on. It's even more noticeable with this test. This is just swapping between grid styles. We get that streak coming through the screen, and this is screen tearing, so it's still going on with the Q90. But like I mentioned, while I was playing games, during gameplay itself, I didn't notice it. Real quick, I did want to test out some PS1, so here's Pepsi Man with no frame skip on. We're around 39 FPS. It's not as bad as I thought it would be. When turning frame skip on, it does get a little better, but we're around 49, and this isn't even a really hard game to run, so this machine just isn't going to do PS1 well. Original Game Boy emulation's always been pretty easy to do on these lower end consoles, but I still wanted to make sure it could handle it, and it looks pretty good. As for Sega Genesis, also known as Mega Drive, this console's handling it fine. To my surprise, after seeing SNES running so poorly, I figured we'd get some issues here, but it's working out very nicely on this little Q90. Just to be sure about that, I wanted to test Gunstar Heroes. There's just a lot going on in this game, and sometimes it does make these lower end chips lag, but it also handled this game just fine. Game Boy Advance is working great also. This is Sonic Advance 2, pretty fast-paced game. Usually run into some issues with this one in Part 3 on these lower-end systems, but I haven't noticed any slowdown here and it seems to be working great. And finally, I just wanted to show off some PC Engine emulation. You won't have any trouble at all. This is actually using the Temper emulator, and it works really well on low-end SoCs. So in the end, it's really hard for me to recommend this little handheld at the price point of $50. But if the price ever comes down to around $25 or $30, even with subpar SNES emulation and PS1 emulation, I think it would be worth it. There's still thousands and thousands of retro games that are going to play fine on this little device. But as it sits right now at $45 to $50, I would definitely stay away from it. I personally love the form factor here. I just wish they would have put some different internals in it. Like even just taking the LDK landscape version and shoving it inside of a case like this would have been totally fine for me. The buttons feel great, the screen looks good, and the little analog stick actually works quite well for being a small analog stick, but they've just set the price way too high for what you're getting. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I really appreciate you watching. If there's any firmware release for this, I will come back to it. I'm not sure if there will be, but I will be keeping an eye out. And if you hear anything, have any questions, or want to see anything else running on the Q90, just let me know in the comments below. But like always, thanks for watching.